Good morning, second period and fourth period. You have a sub today, obviously, and I'm hoping you have already turned in the Desmos activity for 7.3a, which you learned how to change the period and how to label the x-axis. Today, I need you guys to get out your notes, your yellow note packet, and turn to where it says 7.3 notes. We're going to be completing this. And then you're going to be working on worksheet 7.3b. And the last hour to 45 minutes, you'll be taking a group quiz. Okay, so I hope this goes good. Okay, so hopefully you guys got the notes out. So I'm going to get started. Okay, so first of all, warm up. What's the amplitude of the following graphs? Just a little reminder. Amplitude, that's your A value. It's the absolute value of A. So your amplitude would be 5. So that means you're going to scale your axis to 5 to negative 5, the y-axis. So your A value is your y scale. Just a little review. You don't have to write this down or anything. And if that's a variable and you don't know if it's positive, you have to put absolute value symbols on it. I'll give you another warm-up like that later on, but just kind of a reminder that amplitude changes your scale on your y-axis. Okay, so exactly what it says at the top of your left-hand side of your notes. It says the amplitude and period of sine and cosine. The results of a graph, y equals a sine x, ranges between negative a and a instead of between negative 1 and 1. So whatever that a value is, that's how you scale your y-axis. The absolute value of a is your amplitude. And so no matter what, you're going to range your y-axis whatever that a value is. It represents half the distance between the maximum and minimum. So again, if your amplitude is 2, and remember that's your amplitude, you're scaling your x-axis to negative 2 to 2, and when you graph this, just a little sketch really quick, the distance is half. So yeah, the whole thing is 4 apart, but your amplitude is half the distance from the maximum minimum. So we'll review on that because we're going to be using that today. And what you learned yesterday is the b value. Okay, the b value represents how many cycles you see at 2 pi because a normal revolution around the circle is 2 pi. So you take, to find the period, you take 2 pi divided by b. And you might want to highlight that on your notes. It is right there on your notes like that at the top right hand schedule. And remember to find the distance on the x-axis. We take the period and we divide by 4. And it becomes your counting principle. So that's how much you count every time you do a line. Okay, so let's talk about key points on a sine graph. So a sine graph normally, I'm going to write it twice. You start at 0, 0. Then on a positive sine graph, we go up to the max. And it's usually pi over 2, and then whatever our a value is. So if a is 2, then we go up to 2. Then it's pi, back to 0. These are all your x-intercepts, has 3 x-intercepts. 3 pi. Negative a, because it's going down now, and then 2 pi, back to 0. Okay, now keep in mind that yesterday we learned that depending on the period, depends on how these are labeled. This is only in normal. So if your b value is going to change your period, so really the last point is 2 pi divided by b. And remember, we changed that and we did the fourths of that. So it would be your period divided by 4 here. This is going to be your period divided by 2. Because remember, it's halfway there. And this is 3/4 of your period. Kind of wrote that weird. But you'll get the idea. I'll rewrite it. 3/4 of your period. And a lot of times, that that third point, or the fourth point overall, has a 3 in it, unless it can reduce. And this is your period. Okay, so let's keep that in mind as we're going to graph the sine graph. And if you haven't grabbed colored pencils yet, you might want to get colored pencils out, or 3 different colors, because I'm going to graph them. Actually, I'm going to graph them in 2 different colors on the front and 3 different colors on the back. Okay. Before I go on that cosine graph starts at 0, 1, but we're going to say that's A. And it ends up at 2 pi divided by B back to A, whatever A is. And if A is negative, then it will be a negative number there. And then this is the period divided by 4, 0, because it's your x-intercept. This is the period divided by 2, and this is negative A if it's a positive cosine graph. And this is 3/4 of your period, and 0. Okay, so you don't always have to write down the 5 key points, but I need to see them on your graph. So again, if you don't have colored pencils, there's some colored pencils on the table, so go grab them. And we are going to graph. So the first 2 are going to be what you saw yesterday. Actually, example 1 is what graph that you did on Desmos. Number 2 is similar to one you did on the homework, and then number 3 and all those on the back are a little bit different, and we're going to be challenging you a little bit more. So let's graph this first one. So you know, this means the same as this. They mean exactly the same thing. X over 2 and 1/2 x. Most people are going to like this better. And these are things that you need to find. The amplitude, the period, and then dividing into equal parts every time. And that's how I grade your quizzes, your tests, and everything. Is I look, do you have the right amplitude? Do you have the right period? Did you divide it into right equal parts? And then is your shape right? Is it a sine graph, cosine graph, upside down, inverted, whatever? So let's first find the amplitude. Well, it's understood that there's a 1 there. So our amplitude is 1. That means I'm going to scale the y-axis from 1 to -1, or -1 to 1. Now I need to find the period. You're going to go 2 pi divided by b, and our b is 1/2. So we keep flip change. So our period is 4 pi. So that by the time we got to 2 pi, we only saw half the graph. Okay, now I'm going to divide this, and I'm going to write my 5 critical points. For you guys just starting out, you probably want to write these 5 critical points so that you know what the graph is going to look like. And because that's our period, we're going to divide that into 4 equal sections. So each line, or your x distance, is pi. So it's a sine graph. It starts at 0, 0. It ends at 4 pi, 0. And I don't mind doing the middle part, because I know the middle part is going to be half, and that's also 0, because sine graph has 3 x-intercepts. But now I want to figure out the distance. Well, this would be pi, and this would be 3 pi, because we're counting by pi. 0 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi, 4 pi, and if I asked you to keep going, which I'm going to in the back, we would go 5 pi, 6 pi, 7 pi, 8 pi. Okay? Amplitude is 1, so we're going to go up to 1. And then this point is going to go down to 1. And if you're not sure, you can go back to this. Our A value and our negative A value go here. Okay, so I'm going to do this first graph in blue. And I'm going to graph it. And I'm going to be flipping back to this graph later on. Where did the graph go? Now I have to find where the graph is. Here's my graph. So we had the point 0, 0. We had the point pi was 1. 2 pi was 0. 3 pi was -1. And 4 pi was back to 0. So again, by the time I get to 2 pi, because my b was 1/2, I've only seen half of the whole graph. Okay? So this was, so blue, I'll put up in here, was y equals sine 1/2 x. Okay, now we're going to do example 2. In example 2, here's a picture just so you guys can see. This is basically a normal graph is this. You can see this is the normal graph, and that is our half one. So it is basically stretched very long along the x-axis. That's not on your notes. I just want to show you guys. Okay, so example 2 has a couple different things on it. I have an a value. The a value is actually negative, which is going to invert the graph. So I'm just going to put that right here. It's going to invert. So it's going to be a negative sine wave. So it's going down first. My b value is 2. So my amplitude is still 2 though. Okay? It's always positive. It's a distance. My period is 2 pi divided by b, which is pi. So that means my fifth point is going to end at pi. This is also a sine graph. So I'm going to divide that into 4 equal parts. So the x distance is pi divided by 4. It's also called your counting index. Okay? So start at 0, 0. My last point is going to be at pi 0, and our middle one is going to be at pi over 2, 0. Counting by force, pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 would be right here. 2 pi over 4 is the same as 1/2, and this would be 3 pi over 4, and this would be 4 over 4, which is pi. Now, this is your a value. So this is negative 2 because it goes down first, and this is the opposite. This is 2. So it's flipped over. Okay? I'm going to do this one in red on the same graph we had before. So this one should be more frequency. Okay? So you should see a whole graph at pi, and if I kept going, which I am going to show you guys, I'm just going to keep this going. Actually, you'd see 2 graphs or 2 periods by the time you got to 2 pi. So start at 0, 0. Every sine graph is going to start at 0, 0 this year. And then we had pi. Sorry, I forgot what we had. Pi over 4. Now, there's no pi over 4, so I'm going to make a line pi over 4 right in between theirs. So pi over 4 was down to negative 2. Pi over 2 was at 0. I'm going to make a 3 pi over 4 here. That would be up at positive 2, and then our cycle would end here. So it is wavier, and the cycle completes at pi. And I can keep doing that, okay? And that's going to happen on the back, but I might as well do it now. So this is one cycle. 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. The next point would be at 5/4. And I'm just going to complete this, and I'm going to make it dotted to show you that I'm just completing it. 6/4 is the same as 3 pi over 2. Then the next one would be at 7 pi over 4. And the last one would be at 8 pi over 4, which is 2 pi. So what you can see now is that b value is telling me at 2 pi I've seen 2 cycles, 2 negative waves. Okay, when you're done with that, turn to the back. And this is where it's going to get a little bit funky because we're going to have some kind of weird graphs on this next one. Okay, so at the top of the back it says, remember, one period of a trig function is one cycle, or the length needed to complete all the values of function before repeating the same pattern again. What happens if you multiply the angles by a constant? This is going to be weird. You're going to be like, oh my gosh, we've always had radians. We can maybe not have radians. This one's not going to be the true, but we're going to sketch this, and we're going to sketch at least 2 periods, whatever we can fit in the graph. So we're going to keep going. Okay? I'm going to do this one in green so you guys know when I get to the graph. Okay, so I need to figure out the amplitude. Well, again, the amplitude is 1. There's just understood there's a 1. And the period is 2 pi divided by 2, or pi. Okay, then we're going to divide that into 4 equal parts. So our distance between each point is pi over 4. So I'm going to list my 5 key points. Don't ask me why I have 5 dots this way. Okay, now realize this is a cosine graph. Cosine graphs do not start at 0, 1. They start at 0a. Our a is 1. I mean 0, 0. It's going to start at 0, 1. Okay, if you get confused, go back to the front of the page of the notes. And look at here. Cosine graph goes 0a, whatever a is, then 4th year period to 0, and then so forth. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to start at 0a, which is 1. The distance is pi over 4, so this next point is pi over 4, 0. Then 2 pi over 4, which is pi over 2, negative 1. 3 pi over 4, 0. And then pi back to 1. Again, this point right here a lot of times has a 3 in it, or it does before you reduce it. Okay, so again, I'm going to make this green, and I'm going to go down to the graph, and I'm going to do at least 2 periods. Okay, so here's the graph. So the first point is at 0, 1. I'll put up here y equals cosine 2x. That's the graph I'm doing in green. So 0, 1. Pi over 4 is 0. Pi over 2, negative 1. And remember, a cosine graph looks like a valley or a pond. And pi is back to 1. So right now, I've done 1 cycle, or 1 period. I'm going to keep going. So now remember, our counting index is pi over 4. So 1/4, 2/4, 3/4, 4/4. The next point is 5/4. Don't skip a area. So we go back. Now look at the next point goes down. That would be 6/4, which is 3 pi over 2. 7/4, 8/4. So this is actually 2 cycles I just graphed. Okay? Pretty standard. Only did is we made more than 1 cycle. So that's number 6. Okay. Now we're going to go to number 7. I'm going to do this and you'll notice it says only half a period because this is going to be very stretched out. I'm going to do this one in blue when we get there. Okay. And this one's going to be very stretched out. Amplitude is your A value, 3/2 or 1.5. Remember, it is absolute value. I just know this graph is inverted. So instead of looking like a pond, it looks like a hill. It starts at the lowest point, which will be your A value. The length of the period is 2 pi divided by 1/2, which gives you 4 pi. That means your distance on the x-axis is 4 pi divided by 4, or pi. So I'm going to list my 5 key points. Okay, so now, if you go back to the front, like I said earlier, see if I can find the paper. Just had it. Cosine graph is 0a. Well, our a is -3, so it's going to start, or -3/2, at -3/2. That's our first point. Then we're going to go to 0, then to opposite of A, 0, and back to A. Well, we know the period is 4 pi, so this one is 4 pi, and this is back to negative 3/2. And this would be pi, 0. Again, you can go back, look at where the x-intercepts are. This is 2 pi, positive 3/2, because it's the opposite of A. This is 3 pi, and this is 0. And it says only 1/2 the graph because it's all it's going to fit on here. Hopefully you guys are following along. Again, inverted. So we're starting at whatever A is on the cosine. Sine always starts at 0, 0. Cosine starts at A value. So I'm going to graph that. So I'm going to start at 0, negative 3/2, which is negative 1.5. Then I'm going to go to, sorry, I'm going to move my paper here, to 0. So pi is 0. So it's very stretched out. 2 pi is up here. And that's all I can see unless I lengthen my graph, which I haven't lengthened. So I only see half the graph because that's your B value. Okay, so a lot of this we did, you guys did on your homework, nothing too new, just a little bit of a review right now. And now we're going to make it a little bit more complicated. And you're going to see these on the quiz at the end of the period. So we're on number 8, and then I'm going to go back and graph number 8 on this also. So you're having all those on the same. I'm going to make this one red. Okay, now what's different? Look at your B value. It has a pi in it. We don't usually do that. So this is where the pi's are going to cancel out and you're going to have whole numbers. So if you looked at my graph, there were some numbers up here, not with pi. We're actually going to use those. They're not degrees, they're just numbers. So we're going to sketch 2 periods. Might have to extend the graph a little bit out. My amplitude is 2. My period, okay, 2 pi divided by B. Okay, well think about it. 2 pi, key flip change. Your period is just the number 4. No pi in it, just the number 4. Well then what does that make the the distance of x be? Well, you're going to divide that 4 into 4 equal parts. Every line is going to be 1. So let's think about our 5 key points before we graph it. We start at 0a, which is 2. It's a positive cosine graph. The period is 4. This is going to be a 4. No pi, remember. This is 1, 2, 3. And then it goes to 0. Then it goes to negative 2. Then it goes to 0. And back to 2. Again, a cosine graph has 2 x-intercepts. It starts at A, goes to negative A, goes back to A. So it can repeat. And we're going to sketch at least 2 periods. Okay? So like I said, I'm going to do this one in red. So I'm going to go back to this graph. And I'm going to start at 0, 2. Way up there. And then 1, not pi, just this 1 is at 0. And if you guys were doing a graph like this, you would just label 1, 2, 3, 4. You don't have to do anything else. 2 was negative 2. 3 was 0. And 4 was back to 2. So this is y equals 2 cosine pi over 2x. Still looks like the same type of graph. It's got a higher amplitude than the other ones. At 2 pi, where it's kind of hard to show you how much of the graph we've seen. It's kind of not easy with the B. Now, I want to keep going. So remember my counting index is 1. So the next point after 4 would be 5. The next point after that would be 6. I'm just going to continue this so you guys can see the whole thing. 7 and 8. Because I'm going to ask you a lot of times to graph 2 periods. So in red, I just graphed 2 periods. Okay, so if your b value has a pi in it, that means you're scaling by numbers, not radians. Okay, now let's talk about the very last example. Again, this would be on the quiz. It says sketch y equals cosine x on the interval of pi over negative pi to 2 pi. Never done that to you guys. That's where I want your graph to go. Not 2 cycles, not 1 cycle. I don't know how many cycles. I just want your axis to go to that. I would do this normal to begin with. Okay, so amplitude is 1. Period. Well, b is 1, so 2 pi divided by 1, it's just 2 pi. It's just a normal graph. Divide that into 4. Pi over 2 is our distance. Pi over 2 is our distance. I put a 4. Okay, so I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. This is pi over 2. This would be 2 pi over 2, which is pi. This would be 3 pi over 2, and this would be 2 pi. And I'm just going to graph this cosine graph. I can list the 5 key points for you guys, but I figure since it's a normal cosine graph, we could pretty much do it normally. Okay, so this is where you have to learn to continue the graph. Like so I continued it on the last couple where I've done 2 cycles. Well, now I need to go to there. Well, look at on the right-hand side interval, I've already gotten to 2 pi, but I've not gotten to negative pi. Your counting index is still pi over 2, so we're going to go backwards. This would be negative pi over 2, and this would be negative pi. And we're going to continue the cycle. So it has to be a curve. So if you're already at the top, then you got to go the x-intercept, then you got to go the minimum. I'll just put this in blue so you guys understand this is the part I extended it. But that is the answer to this. That is the whole interval I need to go to. And what I just did is I graphed it to it at 3 pi. And my period was 2 pi. So I've seen a period and a half. Sometimes you may not even see a whole period. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay, so now, on your homework, you're going to work on this for a little bit. You guys are going to work on the next worksheet. Let me grab it really quick out so you guys can see what I'm talking about. So on this worksheet, in your packet, because you already turned in all these, you should be here. Okay, I'm just going to read the directions for you. For each trig function can be roughly sketched using 5 main points. Think about those points. Would be, and then sketch each equation using those 5 points. Pay attention to the amplitude and the period. Make sure you label the x and y axis with everything. So the first ones, 1, 2, 3, and 4, you're going to label all critical points, which means just label the x and y axis. I don't need you guys, if you want to list the 5 critical points, you can, you don't. Maximum height, that you don't really have to list it on the quiz. It's going to ask you to list the maximum height and minimum height, so if you want to, you can. The location of the maximum height and minimum height and the x-intercepts. So if you actually list all 5 critical values out, you've done all that. I don't care if you list them. If I can find all the parts, I'm okay. So on these, you're going to do 1 cycle or 1 period. Be really careful. That one has a 2 pi in it. Okay, make sure you know the amplitude, make sure you pay attention if it's cosine or sine, and if it's inverted. Now, down here on number 5 and 6, you're going to sketch 2 periods. So you're going to extend this out longer, and so be careful. When you're making your 4 lines, you're actually going to need 8 lines here, so be careful to not smash your graph too much. Okay, so 2 periods. Okay, then if you go to the back, also 2 periods, so people forget when they turn it over. This is also 2 periods. Okay, so again, you're going to need 8 lines. Don't be worried about the negative 0.8. Just make it a little under 1 and you're fine. Again, be careful. That one has a pi in it, so your labels are not. And then these down here, you have an interval. My suggestion to you is graph it normally. Sometimes you have to go back and erase. Or cut your graph off as you're doing it and then go and extend it what you haven't done. So you have to be careful. This one, you're going to only see part of the graph on the right. Okay. I would also say this one, look at the interval. It doesn't have a pi. That means your labels aren't going to have a pi because this is a pi. I always look at the interval to help me. This one has 3's in it. Probably means you're labeling it by pi over 3 or pi over 6. Okay? You're not labeling it by pi over 2 and have 3's there. I wouldn't do that to you. Or pi over 4's and have 3's there. So it's probably either pi over 3 or pi over 6 for your labels. Okay? You have the rest of the period to work on. Well, no, you don't have. You have at hour 45 minutes left. Sub is going to give you a quiz to do. And the quiz are going to have 5 questions just like this. And you're going to turn it in, and I'm going to grade these individually and give them back to you hopefully Friday. Okay, hopefully you guys understand this. Friday will be an easy day, so we can go over a lot of things, and we can start looking at the quizzes and maybe see where the common mistakes are. Okay, hope you have a good period. Thank you, Seb, for subbing for me.